I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. My guest today is MP of New Brunswick Southwest, John Williamson. Thank you for being here today, John.
It's my pleasure. Nice to be back with you and all your watchers.
Congratulations on what was a landslide win. That must feel great to have such support from the riding.
Well, thank you. And the results mirror what we earned in 2019. So it was a nice validation of the work that I've been doing together with my incredible office in St. Stephen. And I think over the last couple of years, the topics that I focused on, from rural internet to mental health to support for the fisheries, and then of course the work throughout the pandemic, I think resonated with an awful lot of voters. And so we're on the right track, and we'll just keep working hard for people.
One of the issues you're currently already working on has to do with the border reopening to Canadians going to the U.S. and returning on November 8th. But there is a PCR test requirement that for a lot of border town residents makes it inconvenient, unfeasible to just go over for a day trip. But I know you've called on the government to drop this requirement, maybe bring in rapid tests as an alternative. What's your stance and what's your argument there?
So, look, I think there's a lot of excitement about the border reopening because it symbolizes that another step towards getting back to life before the pandemic. Although with where we're at with the waves, I don't want to suggest we're there yet, but it's a signal that we're getting back to normal. I've issued kind of a word of caution to residents in the area that just because Canadians can now cross into the United States and come home doesn't mean it's going to be easy to go over for a day trip, whether it's to visit a family member or friend, or just go over shopping and enjoy an afternoon in Maine. Because of the requirements that when Canadians come home, a test is necessary, there is a lot of red tape and potentially a cost to on Canadians to come home. And so the system now really is bureaucratic. And so I think the federal government should look at rapid testing where necessary and move away from these expensive tests that are currently required, because the rapid test will tell us the same information. The percent of people that they're picking up right now who do test negative is like 0.2%. It is so low that if we maintain that requirement that people who come in are vaccinated and have to take a rapid test, that will ensure the borders are open, people are able to cross back and forth in a way that is safe.
That's it. And to travel into the U.S. starting in November, you will have to be vaccinated anyway, so that will definitely decrease.
Well, that's right. Yeah, and that's true both of land, which is opening, and air, which currently it is possible to travel into the United States without being vaccinated. Because I'll give you an example, just so your audience doesn't think I'm against the idea of ensuring that we're safe. Right now, I could go to the Charlotte County Hospital, get a test, cross over into Maine, stay there for just under 72 hours, get my test result, and come back home using that test result. The test tells us nothing about contacts I might have had in Maine, making it effectively useless and really just red tape. Now, some people are saying we'll keep the border closed, but if that's the case, it should be closed to Americans coming here. Now, I think it's time to open the border. Don't get me wrong, but to do so, we have to do so in a way that makes life more easy on Canadian or easier on Canadians, not more difficult, and doesn't throw up these needless hurdles where we can use tests that are 3-day-old to come back into Canada. So again, rapid testing would get around that in a way that allows us to get back to life a little bit more.
And this is something you mentioned, we were speaking early, that residents of both countries, citizens of both countries are able to do already, use a PCR test that they've taken in Canada. As long as you come back within 72 hours, that's sort of a loophole, but it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Well, that's it. So currently, anyone that's a dual national living in New Brunswick has already taken advantage of this system, getting a test beforehand, going over, coming back. Now, again, this is another challenge because the testing in New Brunswick is increasingly focused on local outbreaks. So the priority is not on the day tripper test, which means a few people that I know have actually gotten caught where they came back, the test result hadn't come back, and so they had to isolate for a period of time. And of course, the alternative to all that, getting tested in Maine, is to pay for it in the United States, and that's upward of $150 US. That adds up, particularly if a couple goes across. So let's either harmonize our system with the Americans, which is people can enter the country if they're double vaccinated, or, if necessary, and when necessary, use rapid tests.
And imagine the PCR test, much like Canada, we would have to schedule an appointment to, so you could actually have your trip accidentally extended too. Could be a problem.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, look, I suspect when they're charging upwards of 200 Canadian dollars, you can probably get a PCR test pretty quickly. But it's a rigmarole. You have to find a location. I don't know how many are in the area, how far you have to go, and then of course there's the cost as well, and that has an impact on families, has an impact on friends that live on both sides of the border. Because as I like to point out, the federal government can take a distance view of this and put in these rules, but the blood ties in this area predate Confederation. Families have straddled the border, and so right now, these measures, I think, they're not only an inconvenience, they're not necessary.
Do you think this is an issue that other MPs representing border communities will also be pushing for? Do you think that there's likely a change to come? Or?
Well, I mean, I do. I mean, I'm hoping to get an early question period and ask the Prime Minister and frame it just that. What's the point of a system that allows me to get a test in Canada, go to Maine for 3 days, and come home and show that test? What are you learning? Nothing. And as a way to try to change the policy, but I'm sure MPs with border towns across the country feel the same way, and we see as well that a lot of U.S. congressmen and women are pressing for change as well. Because, look, if the federal government's going to say the border's open, then let's open it in a way that's reasonable. Let's not say it's open, but then put in place in policies that really are designed to keep people home.
And speaking of border towns, Campobello's obviously had issues throughout the course of the whole pandemic, having to travel through the states to get to the rest of the mainland, especially when the ferry hasn't been able to run. What is going on with the ferry? Are there any plans to push harder for a year-round ferry to Campobello?
So let me address just the pandemic first in the Canada-U.S. border, because that's something that is the federal government. So currently, it's the status quo. Campobello residents continue to be able to cross through Washington County with the same rules they've had since the start of the pandemic. My office is working that continues after November the 8th because of the uniqueness of the island. As for the ferry, it continues to be one of my top issues. I have worked on it, and I'm ready to work on it again in collaboration with the council in Campobello and with the province. But I was pleased to in the last Parliament secure a verbal commitment from the federal government. They'd be willing to look at the infrastructure side of things. So that was a new development, and it's one that I'll continue to press when plans for a ferry are proposed.
And you've said this in the past, that it could be a collaboration between the federal and provincial government. That's still something that you'd be willing to collaborate on.
Absolutely. And my office, and this will probably be for another segment with you, because I don't have the details yet, but I'm also beginning to look at arrangements between Ottawa and other provincial governments to see what kind of funding arrangements currently exist. I've been told there are none, but I'm going to check the spending to be sure on that, because if I'm able to find an example where Ottawa is assisting other ferries with their operations within the province, that I think even strengthens the case for Ottawa to do more here. So it's an ongoing file in my office. I know it's an important one for not only the residents of Campobello, but I think it's seen as a fairness issue now for a lot of New Brunswick constituents throughout the province.
Representing a border area, what have been some of the main concerns throughout the pandemic from residents? I know Campobello has its own really unique concerns that you're often addressing, but what have been some of the others that you've had to deal with?
Well, look, I mean, for businesses, it's been able to access services and clients or wholesalers in Maine. It's been essential workers getting to and from New England, for example. But the border has been a bit of a buffer for us as well. And I think for the longest time, most people were content just to lower the flow of traffic across that border But as we've all been, as more and more of us have been vaccinated now, I think people are ready to start to travel again into Maine, to visit family and friends. So I think the pressure is going to grow. I saw the response this week in St. Stephen and elsewhere when people began to realize that the government's announcement was not quite as advertised, that it's really going to prevent people from just going over and living our lives. And you know, I've maintained I was critical of the federal government for opening the U.S. or opening our border to U.S. citizens while not having a reciprocal agreement that allowed Canadians to go there. I think the border should open on both sides. I didn't like that because I think if it's safe for Americans to come here, it's safe for Canadians to go to New England or to the United States and then come here as well. So I'm pleased this is happening, but there's a lot more work to be done on it to ensure that we don't have this unnecessary red tape and that people can come and go by following the health measures.
On the topic of the pandemic, CERB, I think wage subsidies, rent subsidies for businesses coming to an end this month could potentially be renewed. Do you know what the latest is on that?
So Parliament a year ago, more than a year ago, passed legislation that saw these programs go until this month. The Cabinet has the authority to extend it another month, and Parliament will come back and debate that. We're really cutting it close. I mean, Parliament's not coming back till November 22nd. That's 2 months after the election for what Justin Trudeau said was the most important election in a generation. It's been a month. The Cabinet's not been announced yet. It's time to get to work because it always takes time for government to pass legislation, and the Cabinet extension will take these programs to late November. But bills do have to go through the upper house. They have to go to the House of Commons, then the upper house, the Senate. This doesn't happen overnight. So I do worry because the federal government's not moving quickly. There could be a gap here.
Mm-hmm. And with New Brunswick facing its fourth wave, I've heard both arguments. Some people say things like CERB have led to some of the employment lack of workers in the area, especially in the summer months and the tourism season. But I've also heard the argument that the fourth wave, these might be things that are necessary for New Brunswick, who's been particularly hit hard by maritime standards by the fourth wave. Yeah,
well, that's it. And look, I think like any program, it's helped people, but it's also had unintended consequences as well. So, I mean, I read a story this morning that 40% of restaurants continue to lose money because of the restrictions. And now with the passports, some restaurants are seeing less business, which is not surprising. So, I think there's an argument to tailor make some of these programs, but at the same time, we don't want to have negative incentives that keep people from taking a job again, because it's been a real challenge, not only here in St. Andrews and St. Stephen, but we're finding it all over the place now. That the number one issue I think for small businesses is not able to find workers. The good news is we're seeing wages going up for workers, and that's certainly helpful, and I'm pleased to see that. But we don't want a government program to be standing in the way of someone taking on work, because that's important as well.
I know the pandemic, I seem to ask so many questions about it, but it is a worldwide pandemic, yes. So I think it's fair. Obviously, we're hearing now more about booster shots in New Brunswick. It was opened up to, I think, healthcare workers yesterday. We already have it coming to seniors living in communal homes. Does Canada have plans to produce vaccines domestically, especially if we're hearing, I read an article, I haven't read it yet, it's on my desktop, about maybe there's a new Delta mutation, so it looks like this could be a reality, booster shots for a long time in the future. So does Canada have plans to produce a supply here?
So, yes, we do. The problem is it's still many, many months away. There was a good segment on CBC last week which talked about the deal that the Trudeau government tried to strike with CanChina or CanSino. It's a Chinese firm, And it fell apart. It was a mistake for Justin Trudeau to try to go in that direction, to work with a country that has become more hostile in its relations with Canada. And we lost months. And so last year, the federal government finally announced plans to build production here. And I raised the deal with China because the point of the story was we lost months, not only in securing vaccines from abroad to purchase, but also to establish infrastructure here. So since then, since that deal collapsed, the Trudeau government has moved to do both, to buy as well as be able to produce. But it takes time to build that infrastructure. And so I think when it was announced, it was the end of 2021. But I think with delays they've experienced, we're in now 2022. It's an all-purpose facility. It's one that will be able to produce vaccines. But I think for now, we're still having to acquire them. And look, that's okay. It's worked. It can be expensive, but it is ensured we have had a supply here in Canada. And that's probably what we're looking at for at least the next, I would say, 6 to 12 months.
On the topic of the Trudeau government, snap election was obviously called this fall. You reclaimed your seat, so did many MPs. The government doesn't look that different than the one we had before. What's your perspective on that? Was it a necessary election? Was the outcome expected?
So, well, it depends who you ask. So we go back with a hung parliament, very, very similar. Let me look here in Atlantic Canada. Atlantic Canada, there were some interesting developments. The Liberal Fisheries Minister was defeated in Nova Scotia, I think signaling really a lack of support amongst fishing communities for policies from the Government of Canada. This is going to require, I think, a rethink by the federal government on fisheries policy. Conservatives also picked up a number of seats in Nova Scotia and one in Newfoundland Labrador. So something's begun to change here. I think in part the pandemic wasn't quite intense in Atlantic Canada, whereas in Ontario and Western Canada we had a pandemic election here, but it was much more intense elsewhere. So I think when it came time to voting, people were actually voting not on the pandemic in Atlantic Canada, but on the record of the federal government. Elsewhere, it's a wash. All the parties picked up some seats, lost seats, but in the end, it's a wash. So I think Canadians have the message I get is continue as before. The minority parliament has worked. We've seen parties working together to pass important bills around pandemic spending and relief programs. It's also allowed the opposition parties to establish committees like the Canada-China Committee, of which I was a member on, which I think was one of the most important committees in the last Parliament to really dig into what the federal government has done and where it's failed in its relation with the country's relationship with mainland China. So really, we're going back to a very, very similar Parliament. The Prime Minister is going to have to work across party lines to get things done, and I think that's worked well. And I think it's important that we have all voices at the table. From the Liberal perspective, I think Justin Trudeau hoped for a majority government, and that didn't happen. And here's the problem, getting back to the travel. I don't think the federal government really has much moral authority to keep people at home with this red tape about traveling when they called this election. And then a month later, Trudeau takes a vacation on the first holiday for national reconciliation. And now we have federal ministers who are putting in place policies designed to really keep Canadians home when they're trying to signal internationally that the border's open. I think we need policies here that make sense and that aren't political. So, I think a lot of us are looking forward to getting back to Parliament. I've got some questions for the government on issues like this that I think they'll have a tough time answering why, again, this test that I can have in New Brunswick is good when I come back from Maine. Maybe we should think about a better solution going forward. It's just because, look, the pandemic's been hard on people. We don't need federal government putting in place policies that make life even more difficult. And right now, that's what they've done.
Fisheries Minister, obviously one of the big upsets in the election. Do you think she lost her seat based on her role as the Minister of Fisheries?
I do. Yeah. I do. Look, the big issue right now in the fisheries file is dealing with the Marshall decision. And what fishing communities want is to ensure that fishery, there's a level of fairness and conservation. Fairness both for Indigenous families that want to enter the fisheries, and fairness for families all over Atlantic Canada that are worried about their livelihood disappearing. And on top of that, it's a question of conservation. The Marshall decision was very, very clear. There's a role for, there's a place for Indigenous communities to fish. There's also a place for traditional non-Indigenous fishing communities to exist. But at the end of the day, the federal government does have the role to oversee this. Mm-hmm. And that's where the point of friction has come. Bernadette Jordan wasn't prepared to endorse that. And that's why I think we saw some of the challenges over in Nova Scotia. And I think it's a direct result of her handling, failing to recognize the many different points of view, and just allowing the situation to get worse and worse and worse. So I hope the new fisheries minister is from the region and understands Atlantic Canada better than the last minister.
Do you have an idea when we will find out who that is? How long does it take for the ministers to be appointed?
Well, now, again, this is where I think I'm disappointed with the Prime Minister. When he won in 2015, new government, he was rolling after 17 days. Today is 30 days since the election. His cabinet will not be announced until October 26.
Okay.
And then we're still weeks after that until Parliament sits. More than 2 months. And the timing of this also means that because Parliament takes a few weeks to kind of get up and running, there's a procedure to go through. We elect a speaker. We then appoint one committee that establishes all the committees. So it's likely committees and Parliament aren't going to sit until February. This matters to the government because the committees are run by the opposition, or rather the government does not have a majority on the committees, and it's another point where we can hold the federal government accountable. So by ragging the puck here, the Prime Minister is ensuring there'll be less oversight until the new year. But this is a government right now that is sleepwalking, that could have been in action already. Mm-hmm. To pass bills, because all the bills that were not passed in the last Parliament have died and will have to be reintroduced. And we talked about the COVID relief. Mm-hmm. The time, the clock's ticking. The federal government does not have the authority to extend the COVID relief unless a bill is passed in Parliament. And so let's get to work.
Mm-hmm. No, Bill C-10 was one I was following closely just because it affects my life here.
Sure.
So I do wonder what happens when a bill that's had a certain amount of progress and an election is called. It just starts from scratch.
It does. Now the government will be able to introduce a new bill, and I hope they introduce a bill that reflects some of your concerns about community television as opposed to just focusing on the big telecoms or the big telecoms to deliver community television. But the real issue that got a lot of people agitated was the censorship provisions that allowed federal bureaucrats and the CRTC to prevent individual content from being shared. Now, I understand if it's Netflix or Amazon or the big ones to put them under the same regulatory framework as television stations. But the bill went much further than that and potentially penalized individuals that had large followings. And this is social media. These are individuals who've earned the trust of their viewers. But as well, it also allowed the federal government to put the brakes on information that was shared as well. Free speech. Mm-hmm. And this was a bigger issue outside of Quebec than it was within Quebec, but it's one that I found interesting. It wasn't just conservatives and libertarians and small L liberals that were worried. It was actually a lot of young people. I found the biggest response to this that was unique was from folks under 30 who Whether it's TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, this is the way people communicate today. And there were real concerns that the federal government was overstepping its boundaries. So this I think is a bill that's going to be another dust up on, unless the government kind of goes back to the drawing board and presents a bill that's more in tune, I think, with Canada's values and our commitment to free speech.
Yeah, well, on the topic of social media platforms and online, rural internet is obviously something you care a lot about. What are you going to be pressing for in the coming months? Yeah,
again, this is another challenge because the federal government's program virtually disqualifies much of not just rural New Brunswick Southwest, but rural New Brunswick and parts of the Maritime. That is because built into these programs is a clause that says if a current provider is going to improve their service in the next 5 to 8 years, another entrant cannot come in and compete with them. That's a real problem because it could mean, in fact, no action for a number of years. So we need to get that changed. Look, I think competition's a good thing. I think competition lowers prices. It keeps providers honest. We've got a great example over in Grand Manan of Crave Technology that provides a good service at a lower cost to taxpayer and at a competitive price to consumers. But they've had to work very hard to even get the limited contracts they have. And I'd like to see a system that opens it up to companies like not only Crave to compete, but also allows the big telecoms to come in and compete with each other a little more, and not just say, because one company says they're going to do a better job down the road, that's good enough, because it's not good enough. There are still too many families, too many businesses all over rural New Brunswick that can't get the service they need, and during COVID, it's needed now more than ever.
We are actually almost out of time.
Perfect.
I can't believe it, so I'll have to have you back soon, but I'd love to get your final thoughts just on what will the role of the opposition be going forward when Parliament returns?
Well, again, in a minority parliament, it's greater than ever. I mean, I try to kind of find that line between holding the government accountable, but also delivering results for constituents here, but also providing improvements to federal government programs. And because we're in a minority parliament, the government has to listen a little more. Now, the government doesn't have to listen to the official opposition Conservatives because they just have to find one partner. But I think on rural internet, for example, I've identified areas where they can fix it so it improves it, and same thing with the rapid testing as a way. So I'm looking to provide solutions. As I always say, elections are when we bring out the party colors, we fight tooth and nail for our vision. After the election, we put the party colors away, we roll up our sleeves, and we work with municipal governments to advance local priorities. I partner with the province to ensure New Brunswick is heard in the federal government, and I'm always trying to suggest ideas for government bills on how they can be improved, and that's what I want to keep doing.
All right, well, thank you for being here, John. I hope to have you back again soon.
Absolutely, thank you.
My guest today has been John Williamson, MP for New Brunswick Southwest. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.